Aloha everyone and welcome to another C60 Chat. I'm your host Kay Elmer, and this video is a further extension of the interview I had with Chris Buress from SES Research and MyVitalC. The original interview, we got to talking and it was well over 2 hours. So I wanted to break it up into parts so people can kind of find, whatever content you're most interested in, and really just kind of just deliver you just an easier way to kind of, get the information. So it was a fantastic interview, and Chris and I talked about a lot of different things. Now, part two here is where we really get into the mechanisms of action. How does C60 work in the body? And then he introduces a new theory that he's developed in terms of the mitochondrial effect of C60 and what it's actually happening. And he has a theory on that. And we had a really great discussion just on that aspect itself. And because we kind of got into the physical aspect of it, I do want to repeat the disclosure so that everyone's really clear. Before we get into the content, that there's definitely a disclaimer here because of some of the things that both of us are saying. So without further ado, here's that disclaimer. The information in this video is provided for informational purposes only and is not to be considered medical advice or instruction. Statements made have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. SES products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Consult with your physician or healthcare provider for medical advice. So without further ado, here's part two of my interview with Chris Buress. Thank you. Let's chat about the methods of action in terms of your experience with C60. Of course, you've got customer testimonials, but then you're also doing research, and just the fact that you've been in the C60 space for over 30 years. But what do you see as like one of the most the biggest benefits of C60 in taking it as a supplement? So I just got a couple of bullet points here to kind of touch on it, and then we could chat about it. But I mean, improved sleep. Are you actually seeing that, or is there studies on that?
So let me share.
Yeah.
Our most consistent testimonial is people take it in the morning, they report mental focus and energy during the day, and then better sleep that night, right? And we all know that sleep is good for your mental, physical, and emotional well-being. And as we were going kind of into 2018, deciding that we're going to bring a retail version of this product to the market, one of my roles is I got to try and figure out what the method of action. Actually, the first role is a 90% extension of life a big deal? And it turns out it is, right? You probably know. The next best way to live longer is called calorie restriction. If you reduce your calories by 30%, you can extend your life by 30%. That's been proven in so many animal models that the likelihood that it applies to humans is extremely high. And I call that the starve yourself 1/3 to death diet. Nobody likes to sign up for that, right? And that's a 30% extension. It comes with a sweater when you sign up for that, because if you're starving yourself 1/3 to death, you're going to want a sweater. So first kind of reality check. Yes, 90% is a huge. It's the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, and it is peer-reviewed published research. And certainly proud SES provided the material, and we're mentioned in that original study.
Yeah.
So very, very proud of that. So as I'm coming into this, one of my roles is, one, is it a big deal? And then two, what's going on here? How do we explain? The first thing a scientist asks is great, those rats live 90% longer. Why? And couple that with the sleep, the consistent testimony about sleep. If all we did was improve sleep, then that could explain a lot of these testimonials, right? And we're getting head-to-toe testimonials from these crazy, wacky biohackers. I got to tell you, it was kind of funny. We would get phone calls and these biohackers would say, hey, my knee pain is gone. And I was like, you mean the knee pain of your rat, right? Because it literally says not for human consumption on the labeling. and then they would be like, yeah. If my rat weighs 275 pounds and he does HIIT training on Tuesdays and Thursdays, how much should he be taking? So good sleep is the first one, and really could explain a lot of the testimonials that we're getting. But I wanted to dig a little bit deeper, and you look at what the medical community thinks about aging. They often, not always, think that it's an oxidation and an inflammation process, right? We have this thing called inflammaging. Now it's kind of a new word. Inflammation is so damaging to us that it is a thing that causes aging. And we can check both of those boxes, right? So from the antioxidant side, there's an ad hoc study out on the web showing C60 to be 172 times more powerful than vitamin C. And then there's a peer-reviewed published research showing it to be 125 times more powerful than vitamin C. So absolutely check that box. And actually, we're going to come back to that on our BOSS theory here. In terms of anti-inflammatory, the FDA has equated talking about inflammation with the diseases of inflammation, which are also the diseases of aging, which are arthritis, Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, cancers, diabetes. And so you have to be very careful. In fact, until you can kind of claim those things, you can't actually talk about anti-inflammatory, right? So we have to do a little FDA dance. I think that's the right approach, because otherwise everyone would out be saying it's an anti-inflammatory, and then nobody would understand like where is the real value for those traditional diseases of aging. What we can say is that we address inflammation due to exercise, so acute inflammation. So like we've all had a tough workout, maybe just walked longer one day, woke up that next day, or maybe if you're that biohacking rat, right? You had your 2 HIIT trainings and you felt that inflammation in your body. We address that inflammation. The FDA allows us to say that. And we, of course, fit perfectly in an anti-inflammatory diet. That's a diet associated with the blue zone people. Those people tend to have reduced incidences of stroke and reduced incidences of heart attacks, and also tend to live longer. So we really can check both of those boxes. Now we get into something interesting, which is our current theory, the BOSS theory. So I'm going to get a little technical here, and then I've got a kind of fun example of how the BOSS theory works, like a fun allegory for it. BOSS stands for Buffering Oxidative Stress System. So we know from peer-reviewed published research that C60 gets into the mitochondria. Like we know this.
Right.
We also know from way back in the 90s that it can hold up to 6 negatively charged particles on the exterior of this cage. And what we think that means is, well, let's do a quick refresher of mitochondria. It's the powerhouse of every cell. There's between 50 and 5,000 mitochondria in every cell in your body, except for your blood cells, which actually have 0, and your brain and neurons, which actually have 2 million. And yeah, you pulled that theory up. That's perfect. So your brain and neurons have 2 million mitochondria. Again, it's the powerhouse of every cell. That's how much energy our nervous system uses compared to our other kind of systems in our body. Just like every power source that we're aware of, there's a negative byproduct, right? So your car going down the road has exhaust, your power plant has smoke coming out of its smokestack. In the case of mitochondria, it's reactive oxygen species. So in that first upper left image, the little blue things are reactive oxygen species. In a healthy, unstressed mitochondria, it's got 2 antioxidants present to manage those reactive oxygen species, and that's melatonin and glutathione. Melatonin is very interesting because our most consistent testimonial is related to sleep. So there's a lot of parallels going on here. So you see in the upper left, you've got a healthy mitochondria. As with your car going down the street, it's producing some exhaust, the reactive oxygen species. And because it's not overwhelmed, because it's in a healthy state, you've got enough melatonin and glutathione to manage those reactive oxygen species. You shift over to the right, you've got these stressed mitochondria. And that could be, from that tough HIIT workout. That can be from that long walk. That can be from the stressful phone call you just had. That could be from, putting together a presentation, right? And that can be stressful because you're going to, tax your mind to figure out what's best to put in the presentation. So that stressed mitochondria actually can create more reactive oxygen species than it has glutathione and melatonin to manage those. And that's when you have an unbonded reactive oxygen species that can run around. I think of them like little bumper cars. They run around and everything they bump into, they're rusting and they're causing damage to. And that is the problem. That is the oxidative stress that we tend to take antioxidants to manage. But we think we can manage them even better with this. And we call this molecule ESS60. I can talk about that if you want at some point. But this ESS60 molecule inside of that mitochondria acts as the boss, buffering oxidative stress system. So when those reactive oxygen species overwhelm the glutathione and melatonin, this ESS60 molecule, the C60 molecule, holds on to those reactive oxygen species, preventing them from doing damage until that mitochondria can replenish the glutathione and the melatonin and get them out of the body. So here's my fun analogy. It's the end of Bourbon Street, it's the end of Mardi Gras, and you're on Bourbon Street, and you have these drunk reactive oxygen species running around smashing windows and, smashing cars. And you've got the New Orleans Police Department, the glutathione and the melatonin, right, coming onto Bourbon Street, handcuffing themselves to these reactive oxygen species and getting them off of Bourbon Street. But what does the New Orleans Police Department do when it gets overwhelmed? It takes those reactive oxygen species and sticks them in a paddy wagon. It sticks them on the C60 ESS60 molecule so that they can't do any damage until the New Orleans Police Department can replenish the glutathione or the melatonin, handcuff themselves to those reactive oxygen species, and get them off of Bourbon Street. And so that's kind of why we call ESS60 is the boss, a buffering oxidative stress system.
No, that's fascinating, boy. As you're talking, I've got so many things popping in my head. Like the very first thing is just, environmental stress factors. I think, have you looked into the effect of EMF on mast cell activation, and its damage to the mitochondria? I mean, I think that one of those reasons that we've got so much more reactive oxygen species in our bodies today than, let's say, a few hundred years ago is purely because of environmental pollution, to include electrosmog. I think we're under more molecular stress than I think we've ever been before, just for the fact that EMF can never be turned off anymore. We're getting it beamed by satellites at this point. There's nowhere you can go on the planet and get away from EMF. So that's definitely happening. It definitely has an impact. I love your theory. I think it makes a lot of sense. But where do you see a couple of things? Like, there's been a couple of claims by people taking C60 that it increased their stem cell count. So that's one. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. And then there's the other claim that I've heard before in terms of C60 being able to assist the body extend telomeres. So, those are two other major I think biohackers are obsessed about three things. Their mitochondria, their telomeres, and their stem cells, right?
Yep.
So let's start with stem cells. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, and what have you seen with regards to C60 and stem cell production?
Yeah, so let's first talk about EMF, right? Because there's at least one study out there that supports protective effects against against radiation, right? Which would kind of include EMF. So I think absolutely there's the potential for benefits there. In terms of stem cells, I have not seen any studies, right? So this is one of the problems. You have people in the C60 space, quote unquote scientists, saying things like, it releases stem cells. Oh, it extends telomeres. And I actually had a conversation with one once. So I was like, oh, wow, it extends telomeres. That's great. Where's the research? And they wrote back to me. This was on Facebook probably like 8 years ago. They wrote back to me and said, oh, everyone knows that this, that it extends telomeres. I was like, okay, great. Like, where's the research? And they pushed back again. And they were like, yeah, it extends telomeres. Like, this is obvious. And I was like, no, seriously, like, where is the research? And they were like, none. And I was like, you're a scientist in this space making statements of fact with no research. Like, if you look at the slide in front of you, it says boss theory. Because it's a theory, right? I will never say that it does this absolutely because I'm a scientist and I don't know for sure. We don't have the research yet. Yeah. By the way, I'm gonna segue a little bit here because this was really exciting. At A4M, we had this Dr. Lane Young, who I had met at Dave Asprey's biohacking conference. And he started giving his product to our product to multiple patients of his. And he said this, and I actually have a video of it because it was so profound. He says, I don't care if you're male, female, pre-surgery, post-surgery, diabetic, pre-diabetic, cardiovascular disease, cancer, your product, right? So we're really talking about C60 here, reduces in olive oil, reduces C-reactive protein, and specifically HSCRP, so high sensitivity C-reactive protein, dramatically in 4 to 6 weeks. Now, C-reactive protein, remember I told you we can't really talk about inflammation,
Hmm.
but certainly one of the markers of inflammation is C-reactive protein. I did a podcast recently on for a cancer podcast, and what they said was, let me share with you what Dr. Young said. He said that he had a particular client whose C-reactive protein was at 9, and then in 4 to 6 weeks on our product, dropped them to zero point 0.9. You always want to be below 1 with C-reactive protein, HSCRP. My subsequent conversation on a cancer podcast, I'm like, hey, I've heard somebody say that if you're at 9, you kind of collectively assume that there is cancer present until you prove otherwise. And that particular doctor confirmed that. That's Dr. Karlfeldt. So you're looking at this particular highly C-reactive protein is a high indication of inflammation, and that we're reducing it. And we believe that one of the things that's going on here is if you're managing that reactive oxygen species, the stress caused by free reactive oxygen species run around doing damage, then actually reduce the inflammatory markers, because inflammatory markers are typically your body saying, hey, I need help here, right? Hey, there's something going on here, right? You get inflammation when you get a cut because your body's trying to heal it. Same thing internally. We're just inundated with, like you mentioned, EMF and bad food, and we could get into all sorts of conversations there. But then you're in this chronic state of inflammation because these reactive oxygen species are running around doing a bunch of damage. And we believe that that's why we're reducing HSCRP, because we're being a buffer for those reactive oxygen species so that they're not running around and doing damage, right? So I don't know if you had any questions there, and then I could talk about, I feel like to the best of my knowledge, there is no study saying that it increases stem cells. If somebody's done some blood work, that's great. Or extends telomeres. I just haven't seen that research.
Yeah, yeah, me neither. That's why I was just wondering from your perspective. I do like your theory because, my own personal theory is the idea that it's such a reactive oxygen species sponge that when CCC goes into your body, I mean, I'm glad you just quoted the research. I think it's fantastic that there's actual research that ties it to the level of inflammation because in my mind, the body is a perfect machine, and if you let it run the way it's supposed to run, it'll heal itself. However, because of environmental stressors, it gets damaged and it just doesn't run very well, and it has all these different problems and things that block processes from working correctly. And then C60, this is my theory, C60 comes in and it basically mops up all of that reactive oxygen species. It starts to basically take the stress off of the natural body processes from combating the damage of the ROS, and instead your body starts to run like it should run. And that's why people are seeing the results they're seeing is you're actually, it's nothing more than your body just simply doing what it's supposed to do in a stress-free environment. And it's amazing what happens when you take that physical molecular stress off of us. Because, when like you and I had in our pre-interview, we had a chat about cancer, and there's always been this question about, you know, is C60 a good supplement to take if I have cancer? And there's really no, in the industry, there's all these different people that talk about it, but there's never been a definitive yes or no, except that, I default back to the rat study and said, well, these rats were predisposed to have cancer and die from the cancer. And then when they did the pathology, none of them had tumors. So my mind is that, okay, C60 is great as a preventative, but if you already have cancer, what would your recommendation be? Should I take C60 during, like if I am, undergoing, if I have cancer? Secondly, is if I'm undergoing chemo, because of the fact that C60 mops up toxins, will it undo what I want the chemo to do? And should I be taking it while I'm taking chemo? Because I know that oncologists always will tell you not to take antioxidants, right, when you're undergoing chemotherapy. So what's your position on just on that piece of it by itself? Is the whole claim of is C60 good for cancer or not?
Well, first off, like this starts to get into potentially dangerous waters with the FDA. And let's go ahead and throw out the standard FDA disclaimer. You probably plan on putting it
Yeah,
on
I
the
read
screen.
it out.
Okay, you did. Good. So yeah, our product hasn't been evaluated by the FDA, not intended to treat, diagnose, cure, prevent any disease. Just to get I want to dwell on the original study. So a typical Wistar rat lives out to 32 months and has a known amount of tumor mass in its body. The longer it lives, the more tumor mass there is in its body. And remember, SES provided the material. So we can say the C60 provided by SES, dissolved in olive oil, extend their lives out to 62 months, where they should have had twice as much tumor in their bodies because the longer they live, the more tumor mass they have.
Yeah.
None of them had any tumors, right? And I'll tell that story, and maybe you've told the story, and people are like, oh, cure for cancer. And the answer to that is no.
No, yeah,
And then you
exactly.
follow,
That's I say
right?
no.
You follow that with another no. There's a
Yeah.
huge difference between dealing with a cancer that has metastasized and being what's called a cancer preventative, right? And we know some things as simple as good nutrition, good exercise, good sleep are cancer preventatives. I will share that there are patents related to using the C60 molecule as a cancer treatment in pets. We actually sell fairly regularly to some late stage cancer organizations, right? So those are doctors who believe that this is adding value. I was so fortunate; I got to meet one of them. He's based out of Hawaii, and he was in Vegas for A4M, and so I got to meet him. That was a kind of a really joy. I've been having conversations with him for probably the last 8 years, and we finally got to meet. So that was really good. So, and I'm going to add one more thing, right? Because you bring in a lot of the concern about taking antioxidants is that it can the oxidative process is good, right? So those reactive oxygen species in a stressed mitochondria that end up running around doing some damage end up being signaling molecules. And you want, imagine if you, I don't know, we're in a war scenario and you can't wave the white flag, like you can't ask for help. That's a problem. And these reactive oxygen species are a way of asking for help. It's one last piece of this boss theory that we think is relevant is that it holds on to the reactive oxygen species, but they're still able to do the signaling that they need to do so that they can wave that white flag and ask for help. So that's an important piece. In the case of antioxidants, you want to be careful that you're not interrupting the processes, the biological processes in the body, right? So it is understood hydrogen gas is actually a selective antioxidant, and we believe that C60 is a selective antioxidant that only goes after the most dangerous reactive oxygen species, the most dangerous oxidants, but lets the remaining ones that need to do their job go about doing their business. And we think that's really important. In terms of cancer and anti-cancer agents, I'm aware of one paper where they took a petri dish with cancer cells and healthy cells, and they introduced an anti-cancer agent. By the way, that's always a poison. The goal is to poison the cancer cells before you poison your healthy cells.
Right.
In the presence of C60, there was increased efficacy against the cancer cells. So more cancer cells were negatively impacted by the poison, and there was protective effects for the healthy cells. And it's probably been the last 2 weeks that I've been trying to think about what might be going on here. We understand that the way cancer cells use energy is very different than the way healthy cells use energy. And remember, mitochondria, powerhouse of every cell, including cancer cells, but it uses different energy differently. So we believe that we're increasing or decreasing the negative impact of healthy mitochondria and maybe not supporting or maybe actually decreasing the efficacy of cancer cell mitochondria. So this is something that needs to be further explored and is really exciting. But yeah, we can't make any claim. There's a long,
Yeah.
expensive road to be able to make any claims.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, thanks for that because that's kind of been my recommendation when people ask me in the chat group, which is basically saying, well, it's been proven as a preventative, but we've even got people out there. I think even Ian Mitchell once stated that C60 is not a treatment for, even though there's a lot of different studies out there where pharmaceutical companies are looking at fullerenes as being delivery mechanisms, right, for chemotherapeutic drugs and things like that. But yeah, even with like Ian, he's got that anti-metastatic serum that he's got a patent for. And even that itself doesn't work by itself. you know,
Mm. Yeah.
the dog has to be on a keto diet. So I actually had a dog that I tried to sign up for his beta test, and unfortunately my dog was too far gone
Mhm.
for that study. But yeah, so I know quite a lot about it. So okay, great. No, yeah, this is great. So I get it. I love your theory. I really think that it has a lot to do with just letting the body heal itself, and you help the body do that. And I think that's where C60 really comes into play. And I would love to see research down the road, especially with stem cells and mitochondria. I mean, stem cells and telomeres. So one last question though is that there's also been, a physical claim that C60 should not be taken if somebody's on blood thinners. So I just was, you and I chatted a little bit about that. We got somebody in the chat group right now that's having a difficulty with their parents' cardiologist. So, I mean, like, so is there any evidence out there that can demonstrate that, C60A, we know it's not toxic, right? So we know that's not an issue, but that it
Yep.
doesn't interfere with, like, let's say, standard, cardiologist medication and specifically, the whole thing about, I think someone once made a claim that, you don't take C60 if you're on blood thinners, but, like, where's the science, right? I mean, like, what's your take on that?
Well, I was going to mention something earlier, and so let me go down that path first, and then I'll come back to it. You were talking about human studies. I think we're the only ones who have bothered to do any sort of human study, human trial, and it's related to sleep, right? Sleep is unbelievably complex, right? We still don't understand sleep. If you're trying to understand sleep better, you should go read a book called Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker. It is the most terrifying book about sleep that you will ever read. I call it the Freddy Krueger of sleep books, where Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street would scare people out of their dreams. This book will terrify you about what happens to you when you don't get enough sleep and scare you into your dreams, right? So
Oh, yeah.
it's a great book about how important sleep is. So we ended up through one of the podcasts that I was on, I got introduced to an associate professor, Benjamin Smar, out of the University of California, San Diego. He was a consultant for Oura Ring. And so if we had clients' permission, we could get more data on the back end. So we started this study. It turns out the Oura Ring is great at, this was pre-pandemic. So it turns out the Oura Ring is great at identifying COVID. And so he just disappeared. You can imagine how busy he got. But we went ahead and it's only a 10-person study. It's a crossover study. So we collected 10 days of survey data before they ever started our product. And the survey that we were doing was really simple. It was like, how hard was it to fall asleep? How restless was your sleep? How would you rate your sleep? And then how did you feel in the morning? So we collected 10 days of data before, and I think I've got a chart. I'm supposed to have a chart. It's not here, but we collected 10 days of data before they tried the product, 10 days on the product, 10 days back off the product, and then 10 days back on the product. The summary is 100% of the participants reported improvements in sleep when they were on the product. So I think that's the only kind of human trial that I've ever heard of. And you can imagine with this HSCRP, we can get
Yeah.
a pretty inexpensive test. I've already done my finger prick and submitted my results. I've got a zero point 0.4 HSCRP of 0.4, which makes perfect sense. So we're actually going to start doing studies with that. We need to find people who we would kind of prefer to have. I would actually prefer no one has elevated HSCRP, because you shouldn't. Like, that means things aren't going exactly as planned. But to get into this study, we'd like to have people with elevated HSCRP, give them the HSCRP test, get them on the product for about 6 weeks, and then get another test. And we will be doing that. We are that kind of research company that does those things.
Cool.
In terms of blood thinners, right? We get the question regularly, like, are there any contraindications with any other medications? There are literally tens of thousands of people who have taken C60, tens of thousands of people who have taken C60 on a regular basis with all sorts of different kind of indications, probably on different medications, we have to assume. I'm not aware of any data that suggests that blood thinning is a problem. Like, I'm not even aware of the theory why that might be. And in fact, if we believe that it's getting into the mitochondria, I don't know if you remember there are zero mitochondria in your blood cells. You also actually, it's not water soluble. So kind of my mindset is that how is this going to have a problem as blood thinner? Maybe somebody's got some theory, but I think that falls into the category of I've got a theory. That'd be kind of like me coming on this show and saying, look, we've proved this boss thing, right? Buffering oxidative stress system. This is exactly how C60 works. Now we know. No, that's not what we know.
Yeah,
If you've got a
exactly. Right.
right, if you've got a theory, great. That's great to have a theory. And if you're a scientist and you have a theory, then you present it as a theory. You don't present it as fact. So yeah, I'm unaware of any research related to problems, counterindications with blood thinners.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's so many statements, like again, the telomeres, the stem cells, the blood thinning that people make, and every time I hear those, I'm like, I try to find the science, so I want to understand it better. I know that there's quite a bit of C60 and mitochondria studies, and I got to go revisit that. But I love your theory. It does really align with the way I look at C60, so that's just fantastic. So yeah, thanks for that. So
Yeah.
let's talk. Let's get into some fun stuff. Yeah.
Oh, by the way,
Yeah.
right, would it be beneficial to my company if it increased stem cells, if it extended telomeres, right? Yes.
Oh gosh.
Right. That would be,
Absolutely.
I would love to be able to say that. That's why
That
when
would.
this
Oh yeah.
so-called scientist said that it extended telomeres, I was like, show me the research. I want to start talking about that. Also, that's great for us, except there's no research, so I don't talk about it.
Yeah, I know that's like there's so many I mean compared to let's say, like I don't know, 8 9 years ago today, there's so many different websites that are selling C60 and the claims that they're making is I can't believe the FDA hadn't found them yet. Because I got friends that sell products and they have such an intense focus by the FDA on them that they have to hire an FDA lawyer and run all their verbiage through the lawyer, just to put it on the website and on flyers and stuff. But these other websites out there are just claiming all this stuff, and it's like there's no science behind any of that. But
Yeah.
I think we still are really early. I mean, honestly, if you think about it, like 2012 was what, just 13 years ago when the rat study came out. And 13 years in science is really not a long time, especially if you want to do a longevity study on humans. That's like a 40-year study, right? I
Oh,
mean,
well,
easy. 40
right,
years.
if the average human lives 90% longer, the average human lives to
Yeah.
152.
Well, I was kind of in my intro. I was joking about you. I mean, you honestly, you've got 30 years in the industry. I can only guess what your age is, but you look like you're in your 20s, guy. I mean, so you are the poster face for for C60 and its ability to kind of keep you young. So
Yeah.
it's amazing. And then, that's
By
another
the way,
thing. Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
55. Like I have no
That's
problem sharing.
crazy. I mean, when I was 55, I started graying. But that's the number one question that we have in our chat group is people are always asking about, like where's the proof of what it does for humans? And my thing is, well, go look at Chris. Just take a picture, take a look at Chris's picture. Because you've probably been on C60 longest of most of the people I know, right? I mean, when did you
Probably of
start taking it?
but I'm sure there are some people who have been on it longer. Remember, my business partner and Robert and I were like, we don't want to get into this industry. We ended one of the very first companies to get into the C60 space was it was started by Tom. I can't remember his last
Tom
name, but
Martin.
Tom
Yeah.
Martin. Yeah, we ended up buying his company. He was ready to go off and do
Oh,
other
okay.
things. Yeah, and so we ended up buying that company. So, we own the longest lived brand in the space for sure. I believe that's the longest lived
Right.
brand.
It is. Yeah.
And we provided the material in the original study, and we've been manufacturing and distributing the molecule since 1991. Like so, and we have a lab. Like some people introduce me as a doctor because I'm in a lab coat. I clarify that right away. I'm not a doctor, but it is important for me to share to the audience, whoever may see me, that we actually have a lab, right? And we actually do
Yeah.
research in this lab, and that's, I think, really important.
No, that's yeah, that absolutely, I totally agree.
I can't be more thankful to you, Kay, for being a champion in this industry, for having me, and let's get together again. If you've got questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm in that Telegram group, right? I'm in the group. I don't watch it very often, so feel free to ping me if you want me to chime in on something. But I'm just happy to be in a position that I never thought I would be in, but having my job is to share amazing research and then hear amazing testimonials. And I couldn't be more blessed.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate your time. So, anyone that wants to reach out to Chris, he's going to be at SES Research. I'll put all the links in the video description. So you find you at SES Research, find you at MyVitalC, and you have a podcast, right? So let me go ahead and I'll put a link for that as well. And
Yep.
I just want to say, like talking to you is like given all the research I've done for all these years, it's like literally being in a candy shop. I get to ask every question that I've been wondering about. So thank you so much. I'm gonna have to break this up into parts because there's so much content here, and I'll go ahead and get that done. But thanks for your time. I
Uh,
really, truly appreciate it. I love this conversation, and I really, really, really just am just happy you had some time for me today.
Thank you, Kay.
All
Take
right.
care. We'll be in touch.
All right. You take care. Thank you very much. Aloha.